Our third and final speaker of this morning's session is Val Berger Croup, former curator of the Stiftung Hans Arp and Sophie Taeuber-Arp e.V. Rollenswerth. She is currently research assistant at the Zürcher Hochschule der Künste. If you do any research on ARP, or especially Sophie Taeuber-Arp, you will very quickly encounter her name and her scrupulous scholarship, which has appeared in many publications on both these artists. She is one of the editors of a forthcoming compilation of Sophie Taeuber-Arp's correspondence, and she is co-curator of an upcoming retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Kunstmuseum Basel, and Tate Modern London in 2020-2021. For her essay in our catalog, Walburga explored Arp's continuation of his creative partnership with Taueber-Arp after her death in 1943. Today, she'll be exploring an earlier moment in their relationship in her talk, Notes on a Couple, Hans Arp and Sophie Taeuber-Arp in the 1930s. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming Walburga.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Catherine, and to the Nasher for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here and to talk to you about Hans Arp and Sophie Taeuber-Arp. So, I have to admit at the very beginning that I'm talking about the 30s, but I couldn't find any photo of just the couple, Hans Arp and Sophie Taeuber-Arp, in the 30s. In the 30s, we have photos of the couple with other friends or colleagues, but so I'm starting with the photo in 27. All the information we have about Hans Arp and Sophie Taeuber-Arp as a couple was based for many years on the text written by Arp after his wife died accidentally in 1943. There are no diaries or correspondence from that time. In his poems and essays, he portrayed her as a shy, quiet, diligent woman who preferred to stay in the background. Beside his praise for her work, he wrote about her influence on him. His memory of periods in which they were working together varied from text to text. If we read this text, especially the passages on Dada, but not only on this time, we have to keep in mind that they were written many years later and that it was not Arp's main intention to present facts. First and foremost, Arp was a poet, and therefore we had to read this text not as facts-based. The view of the couple's relationship changed several years ago when a bundle of about 450 letters written by Sophie Taeuber-Arp and dated from 1905 until the end of 1942, 2 months before she died in January 1943, were discovered. Most of the letters are addressed to her older sister Erika, but there are quite a lot addressed to Hans Arp as well. Altogether, they can be read as a biography. And not only a biography of Sophie Taeuber-Arp, we will get a lot of information on Hans Arp as well. The interesting point is that from the 1920s to and in particular in the 1930s, when they were not living in Switzerland anymore, she wrote not only about her work, but also about Arp's and his success. Based on this correspondence, which a colleague and I are editing at the Zurich University of the Arts and which will be published in autumn 2019. And on some of their artworks, I would like to present some impressions of the couple Hans Arp and Sophie Taeuber-Arp in the 1930s. At the end of the year 1928, Hans Arp and Sophie Taeuber-Arp moved from Zurich to Meudon in the greater Paris area, which was the beginning of a new phase in the life of both artists. In the summer of 1926, the Arps became French citizens, and Hans Arp was commuting between Paris, Strasbourg, and Zurich, where Sophie Taeuber-Arp was still working as a teacher at the Kunstgewerbeschule. The income for rebuilding the Obed in Strasbourg made it possible for the Arps to build their own atelier house designed by Sophie Taeuber-Arp in Meudon. In this house, for the first time, they had their own atelier to work in. For Arp, the move to Meudon, or Paris in a broader sense, was a long-cherished dream. Paris was the center of the avant-garde art, and his friends Tristan Tzara, Max Ernst, or Francis Picabia from the Dada period had been living there for years. In 1925, he rented an atelier in Paris and started to exhibit with the Surrealists. So he was aware of the necessity to be present in the struggle for recognition in the art scene. Beyond that was his family, his mother and his brother with wife and daughter living in Paris, and this was an important fact for Arp as well. For Taueber-Arp, the move was a greater step, but made easier thanks to interior design commissions in Paris as a result of the successful work she did in Strasbourg at the Hotel Hanong and the Obed. They made it possible for her to quit the job at the Kunstgewerbeschule, which was until then the only income for the couple. It was a kind of release because the school system was, even at the end of the 1920s, still very conservative in Switzerland. Apart from this, Taueber-Arp started during the time they worked on the Obed, late 1926, until the opening in February 1928, to concentrate on painting. So for her, it was not only a change of her place of residence, it was a transition from applied to free art. From the very beginning, there is a kind of pattern in the couple's relationship that became routine through the years. Hans Arp functioned as the couple's communicator to the outside, the one who made contracts with gallerists, art dealers, and collectors. Sophie Taeuber-Arp was the organizer, seemingly working in the background. One reason for this division of duties that Arp was already well known in Paris art scene and spoke more fluent French, but the main one was definitive, to put it bluntly, the inequality of women, even in art. A typical example from 1927 illustrates the division of roles. In November 1927, she traveled to Paris with Arp to help prepare for his exhibition in the Galerie Surrealiste. Since the date of opening was still being discussed, the transport of reliefs, some as yet unfinished, by train from Strasbourg to Paris had been as follows. She wrote to her sister. Hans had written before that they should postpone the exhibition by 2 weeks. They maintained from Paris that that was impossible, so he wrote with many cardboard reliefs, some half finished, to Paris. When we arrived in Meudon in the evening, half of them were stuck together, so we had to repaint almost everything. While Hans ordered frames and worked on the catalogue, I was painting all day long in Meudon. And this is one of the reliefs in the Surrealist exhibition in 27, so maybe repainted or painted by Sophie Taeuber-Arp, we don't know. But yeah, this traditional role repeated itself through the years. She stayed in Meudon, and by the time, to be honest, I have to admit that it was for money reasons as well, and became more and more a kind of Arp's assistant, as well as doing her own work. Repainting became an essential part in the preparation of exhibitions. Sophie Taeuber-Arp reiterated it constantly in her letters to her sister. She assisted, and this is her word as well, him with collages and woodcuts, and did the layout for publications. A great project was a monograph on Hans Arp that was never realized. She mentioned it for the first time at the end of 1935. In December 1936, Arp asked his Swiss collector Maya Sacher to finance the publication of the monograph. And he described the concept in the letter. And the maquette of the monograph can still be seen at the Fondation Arp in Clamart. It is a collection of texts and works by Arp. The biography was written by Picabia's first wife, Gabrielle Buffet-Picabia, and the layout was done by Sophie Taeuber-Arp. When Arp worked as a kind of co-curator for exhibitions like the one in 1930, Louis was talking about Produktion Paris 1930, Malerei and Plastik, and in the Kunstsalon Wolfsberg, or abstract and surrealist painting and sculpture in the Kunsthaus Zürich in 1936, Zeitprobleme in der Schweizer Malerei and Plastik, time problems in Swiss painting and sculpture. She was responsible for the correspondence with the gallerists, museums, and even with the artists. Even though they were part of the avant-garde, she had to fulfill classical role division in the household as well. In March 1932, she wrote to her sister, "Friday, I do have a dinner here. It is always very difficult for me. It should be good, not too expensive, and I'm supposed to cook, to serve, and to join the conversation at the table." This classical role is the only one she is complaining of. At the beginning of the 1930s, Sophie Taeuber-Arp did drafts for wooden sculptures by Hans Arp to be executed by a woodworker. Oh, sorry. Let's start first with this one. Some of these were reproduced in the Cahiers d'Art in 1931 and exhibited at the Kunsthalle Basel in the exhibition Hans Arp, Serge Brioni, Hans Gies, Kurt Seligmann, Jacques Duplin. These are the two sculptures. And here we can see them. Oh, which one was the... No. This one. And this one. And I do have another instance. There you can see them a little bit better. This one and this one. Okay. Unfortunately, these two sculptures didn't survive. In November 1932, she wrote to her sister, and these are this painted wood sculptures Tessa was already talking about. And she wrote to her sister, "He made beautiful reliefs, but the sculptures which came back broken from Bern are lying like a heap of rubble in the kitchen." So he didn't put them together again. Another work is called Cravate et Nombril, and Cravate et Nombril was published in Cahiers d'Art in 1931 as well, inspired Sophie Taeuber-Arp's own work. On the left side, we have her drawing for the sculpture, and on the right side, there is the installation photo of the sculpture, but we don't know what happened to the sculpture as well. Between 1936 and 1938, she was focused on circular shapes, and one of her gouaches from 1936, posthumously called Colonne et composition dans un cercle noir, gives the impression of looking from above on the sculpture. The cravat was transformed in apparently endless elements of the colonne. The navel became a smaller blue circle, and a big black one can be seen as a semicircle on which Arp's cravat and navel lie. In a way, a forerunner of the integrated base, which Arp later called bowl when he started creating sculptures in 1933. This is a point we have to rethink again. That's the reason I made all the dates for the sculptures in parentheses, because Sophie Taeuber-Arp is writing in January 1933 that Arp began to make sculpture. Working side by side in their atelier in Meudon was much more intense than in Zurich, as they had much more space. Arp, in contrast to Taeuber, preferred now to work in the peace of Meudon's isolation. In 1929, she wrote to her sister, "Anyway, he was right to build the house out here. He can't bear it anymore to be disturbed when he is working, and in Paris he would never have some peace." So working simultaneously in their atelier, which also meant as discussing and exchanging ideas and thoughts, produced similar concepts in their work. Arp started at the end of the 1920s with a series of constellation reliefs in which he arranged different forms on the background, apparently made with any rule. But titles like "Arranged According to the Laws of Chance" illustrate that Arp follows his own regularity. Color is disappearing more and more. Most of them are gray, black, and white. He gave up his object forms and used more and more ovals. For example, in the relief Feuille, which was this one, and now much more in this one, and in the relief Constellation de Cravati Nombri 1 and 2 in the collection of the Emanuel Hoffmann Stiftung Basel. Taueber-Arp drew and painted at the beginning of the 1930s a series of posthumously called compositions schématiques, circles and square in an exact order at first glance. Here I have another photo of the exhibition in 32 because the relief is over there. And now Sophie Taeuber-Arp. Many circles and squares in an exact order at first glance. Sometimes one circle or a square break the rules. Many of the works are black and white, but sometimes she added red, blue, and green. These are some examples of the... Sorry, I was too quick. Like this. In contrast to Arp's organic ovals, her circles and rectangles are exactly done with the help of a pair of compasses and a ruler, which is where her works are called to be geometric abstraction. But being so precise doesn't mean rigid. Like Arp, whose principles seem to be persistent metamorphosis, she achieved the same impression when she gave up the strict grid and let her forms move on the background, like in Cercle Mouvementé and in Cercle et Barré. Both of them, Arp and Taeuber, paid attention to the same question: how to get the best balanced composition. Their answers appear different, but only at first glance. Arp preferred title at that time, like constellation, which means grouping, and Sophie Taeuber's Arp compositions have the same meaning. In 1936, she started to work in wood again. First here we have an example of the constellation composition side by side. She started to work in wood again, which was like going back to the roots, as wood and textile were her keen materials during the time of her studies in Munich at the Lehr- und Versuchateliers für angewandte und freie Kunst, and have been used for many years in her applied arts. Marcel Duchamp was so deeply impressed by the reliefs and her technique of turned wood that he mentioned it in his 1938 catalogue of the contemporary sculpture exhibition at the Guggenheim Journe in London, where he presented a relief by Sophie Taeuber-Arp. Marcel Duchamp. At the Zurich exhibition in 1918, her marionettes and turned wood was the starting point for a new technique in decorative art. Sophie Taeuber-Arp made rectangular and circular reliefs like Arp. Some of the rectangular ones look like her paintings and drawings in a three-dimensional version. So here we have some examples of her reliefs, these are the round ones. She is quite successful with the reliefs, as she wrote to her sister. One was exhibited at here, which means at the Galerie Pierre in Paris, and had a lot of success. Even the oldest friends said a lot of kind words, which means a lot in Paris. Written in June 1936. 1 year later, she mentioned for the first time a work they had created together, which is Sculpture Conjugale in the exhibition. Quotation, Hans has finished a very beautiful new sculpture that is exhibited in the new Gallery Surrealist. A turned wood figure of mine is also possibly going to be shown there. We have made 2 other wood figures together. This was in June 1937. Her wood figure, Sculpture en bois tourné, was not shown in the 1938 Galerie Beaux-Arts exhibition, but rather in the Amsterdam Surrealist exhibition in the Galerie Robert in 1938. Whether the second joint wood figure was in fact Jalon, this is Sculpture Conjugale, and this is Jalon, in the collection of the Fondation Art cannot be positively determined. In a special issue of the journal 20e siècle, dedicated to sculpture in 1939, Jalon is dated 1938 and Hans Arp is named as its sole author. In the archive of the Fondation Arp in Clamart, one can still see the original photos taken in 1937 for reproduction. On the verso of Jalon is written from a not identified person, duo, but on the verso of the photo of Sculpture Conjugale, Sophie Taeuber-Arp wrote in the same way as she inscribed photos of her own works, Hans Arp, Sophie Taeuber-Arp, Sculpture Conjugale, 1933, Bois Tourné, Exposition Surréaliste Beaux-Arts. Jalon is not listed in the catalogue Raisonné of Sophie Taeuber-Arp's work, published in 1948 by Hans Arp and only presented in the 1957 first volume of the catalogue Raisonné of Arp's sculptures as a joint work. Arp later produced no more sculptures in turned wood. That technique was clearly her contribution. His Sockelsäule pedestral column, produced in 1964-65, has clearly the function of a plinth and is therefore not comparable. The material of doll, made in 1962 by Arp, is obscured by its polychrome painting. The obvious similarities in material technique as well as formal relationships between Sculpture en bois tourné, Sculpture Conjugale, and Jalon appear to confirm their later attribution as a collaborative work. In each case, the vertical sculpture begins with a cylindrical shape, relatively short in Sculpture en bois tourné and Sculpture Conjugale that functions as a plinth. In Jalon, the cinder is the central element. I would like to go forward so that you have them all 4. Following the cylindrical base in Sculpture Conjugale is a torso-like shape with a greatly constricted waist that ends in a rounded swelling. In Sculpture en bois tourné, the base is followed by a slightly elongated, rounded form narrowing to a point at the top. All 3 sculptures have major cutouts, most notably in Sculpture en bois tourné, in which roughly a third of the volume of the lower section has been cut away, producing the impression that the remainder is delicately balanced. On the opposite side, there is a smaller cutout in the upper section. In Jalon, the cut is on the front side of the central rounded form, and in Sculpture Conjugale, there are 2 in the upper part of the figure, considerably less acute than in the other works. The cutout in Jalon resembles an open mouth, either laughing or speaking. The last feature invites comparison with Arp's earlier done sculpture Tête de Lutine dit Casper, which is here on the right, and this one. Casper's head consists of an oversized mouse, also open as though speaking or laughing, and becomes a point at the top, much like sculpture in bois tourné. The mouse lacks the severity of the cutouts and the above-mentioned works, to be sure. So we have all the four together. So it's created by a cutout into the closest rounded shape. Its final modulation is softer. The base can be read as a neck lifting out of an imaginary rib cage and narrowing towards the head. All the formal elements of the three wood figures are thus prefigured in Tête de Lutine dit Casper. Participating in the surrealist exhibitions sounds a little bit strange for Taueber-Arp. Probably it was Hans Arp who invited and encouraged her to do so. As early as 1936, she had shown in London one of her reliefs, 5 circles, which hadn't been identified for sure until now. In Amsterdam, at the Gallery Robert, she exhibited, besides her wooden sculpture, 2 gouaches, organic abstractions. One has cutouts, so this abuse of the surrealist exhibition in the Galerie Robert. Here we have the sculpture. And here on the wall we have the blue form of Sophie Taeuber-Arp, one of the gouaches. One has cutouts like the sculptures, and the other shows a form like Arp did have in some of his reliefs. This is the blue form we saw on the wall, and this is the other one with the cutouts, which reminds to the wooden sculptures and to Casper. And this meandering blue form reminds a little bit to Arp's relief La Femme Amphore from 1929, for example. As a resume, one can say that Taueber-Arp's voice in the letters gives us a chance to have a new look at both artists. The image of a perfect couple that Arp created after Taueber-Arp's death is not the image of the couple we find in the letters. The 13 years they lived in France was for sure a period when they functioned best as a couple. Their division of rules, obviously quite conservative for avant-garde artists in some aspect, but not unusual at that time, seemed to be accepted by Taueber-Arp, and particularly as the art scene at that time was not very open for female artists, as she confessed to her sister. In a letter dated July 13, 1937, without the help of Hans, I would be finished as a woman in the madhouse. For her, it was a compromise. Staying in the background didn't mean to be shy or even quiet. Editing the magazine Plastique from 1937 to 1939 demonstrates the opposite. Her part as Arp's assistant can be seen from 2 sides, but finally it brought her back to wood as a material, for example. Living and working so close together as they never did before influenced the work of both artists and let them finally create sculpture conjugale in collaboration. Thank you very much.
Questions?
So you showed a drawing that Sophie Taeuber-Arp made of Hans Arp's piece that was then fabricated by somebody else. How much of the work for both artists was done by themselves or fabricated by others based on drawings?
Sorry.
How much of their work, each of the artists, was handmade by themselves or fabricated by another based on a drawing?
The sculptures, for example, the wooden sculptures, even the reliefs Tessa showed, the wooden ones, or we can say mainly all the wooden reliefs by Hans Arp, the wood has been cut by woodmakers. And even for Sophie Taeuber-Arp, when she made, for example, the puppets, Duchamp was talking about the marionettes in 18. She was, the forms have been cut by, or made in turned wood by woodmakers in Zurich. And she painted them as Arp painted his reliefs, for example. And so we can say with the with the drawings here that Arp had an idea and made a first, let's say, drawing, and then she made the precise drawing for the woodworker so that he get an idea of dimensions. Dimensions are mentioned and everything. And then finally, when the forms arrived, Arp painted them.
Do we have all of the drawings in an
No,
archive?
no,
Okay.
no. This is just by chance.
That actually answers my question. We have one more question. Thank you for your talk. What size are her sculptures? You can't.
The one by Sophie Taeuber-Arp?
Yeah.
The reliefs have a diameter of about 60 centimeters, and the sculpture, her sculpture is a little bit smaller, like the turned sculpture conjugale. It's the only sculpture by Sophie Taeuber-Arp.
Because we didn't see it in an exhibition, any of her work. So would she have put it on another base? Because I felt like his, when we saw him in exhibition, the base is just.
So you saw it in the exhibition in Amsterdam. We don't have, unfortunately, a photo of the one in the Surrealist exhibition in Paris. But in Amsterdam, it's not really on a base. It's nearly on a table with other objects. It need a base, yes. But I don't have any idea how she would have installed it, because this is the only installation photo from the lifetime we have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.